All right, so have you ever looked up at a cloud and been like, whoa, is that a giant bunny rabbit? Or maybe you're in a crowded room and you could have sworn you heard your name, but it turned out to be nothing.
Happens to the best of us.
Well, get this, those little brain blips. That's apophenia in action.
Yeah, it's basically our brains getting a little too excited about finding patterns, even if those patterns are totally random, which, honestly, happens more often than you might think.
Okay, so apophenia. I gotta be honest, it kind of sounds like, I don't know, some obscure medical term. What is it exactly, and where did this word even come from?
Well, the word itself comes from Greek. It means to appear. And it was coined back in the late 1950s by a German psychiatrist named Klaus Conrad. He was studying the early stages of schizophrenia at the time.
Schizophrenia. Okay, now I'm a little concerned. So are you saying apophenia is some sort of mental illness?
Not necessarily. It's definitely more complicated than that. It's true that extreme apophenia can be a symptom of conditions like schizophrenia. But for most of us, it's actually a totally normal brain function.
Okay, that's reassuring.
Think of it this way. Our brains are constantly trying to make sense of the world, right?
Right.
And a big part of that is spotting patterns. It's just that sometimes our brains get a little carried away, seeing patterns that are, well, more about our desire for meaning than actual, real meaning.
So it's like our brains are saying, hold on, I see a connection here. Could be something, even when that something is totally made up.
Exactly. Now, in more extreme forms, like in really severe cases of schizophrenia, apophenia can manifest as delusions. People might start seeing connections that aren't real, and they believe them with absolute certainty. And those delusions, they can be incredibly distressing, even harmful. But again, that's very different from the everyday apophenia most of us experience.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's kind of a spectrum, right? On one end, we have seeing shapes in clouds or thinking a certain song on the radio is like a sign from the universe. And then on the other end, we have much more serious situations that require professional help.
Exactly.
But how do we know where we fall on that spectrum? When does harmless pattern seeking that, oh, look, a bunny rabbit in the clouds turn into something more concerning?
That's the million-dollar question. And honestly, it's something we'll explore in more depth as we go. But for now, I think it'd be helpful to look at some real-world examples of apophenia.
Yeah.
We could talk about seeing faces in everyday objects or the gambler's fallacy, stuff like that.
Okay, now you're speaking my language. Let's talk about those faces in toast moments, because I gotta say, I have definitely experienced that.
Well, that's actually called pareidolia, and it's a classic example of apophenia in action. See, our brains are hardwired to recognize faces.
Right.
And sometimes that system kind of misfires, making us see faces where none actually exist.
Yeah. So when I see a face in my morning coffee foam, my brain's actually going, whoa, hold on. Better safe than sorry. That could be a face. Better pay attention just in case, even if it's just a random swirl of milk.
Exactly. And it's not just faces either. Think about the man on the moon. Cultures all over the world throughout history, they've looked up at the moon and seen a face in those craters and shadows.
It's amazing how our brains can find those patterns even when we know it's just our imagination playing tricks on us.
Right. And that actually brings us to the gambler's fallacy, where this tendency to find patterns can have some real world and sometimes not so great consequences.
Okay, now we're getting into the nitty-gritty. So what exactly is the gambler's fallacy, and how does it tie into all of this?
It's basically the mistaken belief that past events can somehow influence future random events. So picture someone playing roulette.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
They see a string of reds come up on the wheel, and they think, okay, black is due. Time to bet big on black. But as we know,
each spin of the roulette wheel is independent. The past spins have zero effect on the outcome of the next spin.
Exactly. But apophenia can lead people down this path of believing they've figured out the pattern, when in reality it's all random. They might even develop these elaborate systems based on these perceived patterns, further fueling their belief in the fallacy.
So we're basically wired to see patterns, even when those patterns could lead to, let's say, questionable decisions. And this isn't just about gambling, is it? This applies to so many areas of life.
Oh, absolutely. This tendency to see connections where they don't exist can influence everything from our investment choices to our beliefs about health and even politics. That's why understanding apophenia is so crucial for navigating, the complexities of the world around us.
Okay, so this tendency to find patterns is, ingrained in us. But why? Is there an evolutionary reason why our brains are wired this way?
Now, that's a fascinating question. And it leads us to some intriguing theories about how apophenia might have actually benefited our ancestors in a very different world than the one we live in now.
Oh, this is what I love about these deep dives. You never know what fascinating rabbit hole you're going to go down.
I agree. To understand this, we have to think back to, like, our early ancestors, right? They lived in a world full of very real dangers. We're talking predators, natural disasters, you name it. And they didn't have the luxury of always waiting for concrete evidence before reacting to a potential threat.
Right, like hesitating to see if those rustling leaves were really a saber-toothed tiger could mean, well, becoming lunch.
Exactly. So in that context, it was often safer to err on the side of caution, to see patterns even when they might not be there.
So instead of like meticulously analyzing every rustle in the bushes, it was safer to just assume there might be a predator lurking and act accordingly.
Right.
And that instinct, that tendency to connect the dots, even when they're like sprinkled randomly, that could have been a survival mechanism passed down through generations.
That's the theory. It suggests that apophenia, at least to a certain degree, might be an evolutionary adaptation, something that helped our ancestors navigate a world full of uncertainty and danger.
That is fascinating. But if that's the case, how does this, like, evolutionary hangover, so to speak, affect us today? Are we, like, predisposed to see conspiracies in a world that's already, like, overflowing with information?
That's a really insightful question. And it brings us to another fascinating aspect of apophenia, its connection to conspiracy theories.
So we've gone from seeing, like, faces in toast to basically mistaking every rustle in the bushes for a saber-toothed tiger. I can see how that instinct to connect the dots could be like completely overwhelming in today's world.
Oh, absolutely. And it's in this modern context where we're constantly bombarded with information that apophenia can really take hold and lead us down some, well, interesting paths, like right into the heart of conspiracy theories.
Okay, yeah, we touched on that earlier, but I'm ready to like dive into that a little deeper. How does this tendency for our brains to like overconnect, how does that end up fueling those kinds of beliefs?
Well, think back to how we defined apophenia, right? It's all about finding meaningful connections between unrelated things. And conspiracy theories, they often take that same tendency to the extreme. They weave together like random events, facts, figures, whatever they can find, into this grand narrative that feels like it makes sense of everything.
So instead of just accepting that sometimes things just happen or that there isn't always like a puppet master behind the scenes, our brains try to create like a bigger, often hidden explanation. It's like we prefer a compelling story, even if it's not true, over just accepting the unknown.
That's a great way to put it. Conspiracy theories, they thrive on that very human need for explanation, for a sense of control in a world that can feel very random and chaotic.
So someone who's prone to apophenia, they might see like a news story about a political scandal, then there's, I don't know, a weird weather event, and then a celebrity dies, and suddenly, bam, those dots are all connected into a conspiracy involving, like, government-controlled weather machines or something.
It might sound outlandish when you say it like that, but that's honestly how these narratives often take root. Our brains crave those patterns and explanations. Conspiracy theories offer that, even if the evidence is totally flimsy or, completely made up.
It's like our brains are saying, wait, hold on, that makes way more sense than just random chance. There has to be some mastermind pulling the strings. And once that idea takes hold, it can be really tough to shake, even if you, like, present contradictory evidence.
You've hit on a crucial point. It's not just about the patterns themselves. It's about the feeling those patterns provide. Like challenging the conspiracy, it often feels like challenging a sense of order, of control that the belief provides.
That makes sense. But this is where I start to worry. How do we tell the difference between, like, harmless apophenia, seeing a funny shape in a cloud, and the kind of apophenia that leads to, problematic beliefs and choices? Like, where's the line?
That is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
There's no, magic formula. But there are definitely some red flags to watch out for. First, ask yourself, is this pattern based on solid evidence, or am I just, jumping to conclusions?
So, if I see the number 23 3 times in one day, I shouldn't immediately buy a lottery ticket.
Probably not the best financial strategy. Another red flag is confirmation bias. Are you only seeking out information that backs up your existing beliefs while ignoring anything that contradicts it?
Okay, so be open to different perspectives. Don't just exist in an echo chamber. What else?
Pay attention to your emotional reactions. Be wary of information that evokes really strong feelings, especially fear and anxiety.
Mm.
Those emotions can cloud our judgment and make us way more likely to see patterns where none actually exist.
It's like that old saying, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you, right?
Exactly. Fear is a powerful motivator, and it can easily distort our perception of reality. But it's important to remember that apophenia isn't always a bad thing. Like we said before, it can be a source of creativity, of inspiration, too.
Right. This same tendency that can lead us down those like conspiracy theory rabbit holes can also be what sparks our imaginations, what leads to new discoveries.
Think about all the incredible works of art, literature, music, even scientific breakthroughs that have come from those aha moments, those flashes of insight that connect seemingly unrelated ideas.
It's like our brains are wired not only to find patterns, but to find beauty and meaning in the world, even if it means occasionally, like seeing things that aren't really there. But the key takeaway here is balance, right?
Absolutely. Embrace your inner pattern seeker, but temper that enthusiasm with a healthy dose of skepticism and critical thinking.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? How do we keep our inner pattern seekers in check without, like, squashing our sense of wonder and creativity?
That's where we move from just understanding apophenia to actually managing it in our daily lives. And luckily, there are some practical tools and strategies we can use to do just that.
So how do we actually walk that line, embracing that, like, magic of those aha moments without going too far and ending up, like, believing everything we see on the internet? Where do we even begin?
Well, I think it all starts with awareness, right? Being aware of that natural tendency our brains have to find patterns, even when they might not be real. And once we're aware of that, we can start developing habits that'll help us stay grounded in reality.
Okay, so first step, awareness. Check. What's next?
Next, I'd say it's about cultivating a healthy dose of skepticism.
Skepticism, good word.
Which doesn't mean, like, becoming cynical or disbelieving everything you hear, but more about approaching information with, a discerning mind. Question your assumptions, especially when something sounds too good to be true or, maybe a little too strange to make sense.
So, like, if I see a headline that says, scientists discover a unicorn colony living in the Amazon rainforest, maybe I should do a little more digging before I buy plane tickets.
Exactly. Don't just accept information at face value, right? Look for evidence. Consider the source. Is it like a reputable news organization, a peer-reviewed scientific journal, or is it something, some random person shared on social media with no sources?
It's like that saying, trust but verify. Or in this case, maybe like, be intrigued but verify.
I like that. Now, the next tool, this one's a bit trickier for our pattern-loving brains. It's about learning to, embrace randomness.
Okay, that sounds, I don't know, kind of counterintuitive. Like, how do we embrace randomness when everything we've been talking about is like our brains trying to find patterns in everything?
It takes practice, for sure. But it's about accepting that not everything happens for a reason. Sometimes things just are. And that doesn't mean we should live in a constant state of uncertainty and anxiety. It's more about, I think, finding a sense of peace in accepting that we don't have all the answers. And that's okay.
So instead of spending all my time trying to decode some hidden meaning in, I don't know, like a spilled coffee stain, I should just accept that sometimes coffee spills, clean it up, and move on with my day.
You got it. Sometimes a spilled coffee is just a spilled coffee. It's not a sign, not a message from the universe, just a little bit of clumsiness maybe.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. What else can we do, especially like when we're making big decisions and we really don't want to let apophenia lead us astray?
I think that's where evidence-based decision-making comes in. So when you've got a big decision, don't just base it solely on your gut feelings or, some pattern you think you've spotted. Do your research. Gather information from, again, reliable sources. Talk to experts. Weigh the pros and cons rationally.
So to use another maybe slightly over-the-top example, if I suddenly feel this overwhelming urge to quit my job and become, I don't know, a professional alligator wrestler.
Okay, interesting career choice, but let's go with it.
Maybe I should actually talk to some alligator wrestlers, research the risks and rewards, and not just base my decision on the fact that, I don't know, I dreamt about alligators last night.
That would probably be a good idea. It's not that our intuition and gut feelings are always wrong. It's just that they shouldn't be the only thing we're basing life-altering decisions on.
This has been honestly incredibly insightful. I feel like I have a much deeper understanding now of how my own brain works. And more importantly, I think, how to work with it, how to harness the power of apophenia without letting it kind of like run wild.
That's great to hear. Remember, apophenia, it's a double-edged sword.
Right.
It can be a source of incredible creativity, but also delusion of like real insight, but also error. The key is just learning to wield that sword wisely.
Like we're all just explorers navigating the vast landscapes of our own minds.
I love that analogy. We need to be aware of the terrain, the potential pitfalls, and of course the tools that we can use to help us stay on the right path.
Well said. So the next time I see a dragon-shaped cloud, I'll remember what we talked about today. Maybe it's my brain just trying to make something out of nothing, or maybe it's like the spark of a creative idea. Either way, it's definitely food for thought.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe that dragon-shaped cloud will inspire your next great masterpiece, or at the very least, a fun afternoon of cloud gazing.
This has been an incredible deep dive into the world of apophenia. A huge thank you to our expert for being an expert and for sharing these incredible insights.
It was my pleasure, really.
And of course, to all of you out there for joining us on this fascinating journey into the human mind. And as always, a huge shout out to our amazing producer, Victor T., for making this episode possible. We'll catch you all next time on The Deep Dive.